Welcome back to Grandpa and the Millennial. I'm Natasha. I'm the Millennial.
I'm Anthony, and I'm the Grandpa. And we have a fantastic guest today, Mike Portello. He has been in technology sales for over 35 years. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you, Anthony. Nice to see you, Natasha.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So before we jump into your story, tell us a little bit about where you're at in life, what you're doing in your career now, and then we'll start with your background.
Yeah, so you said 35 years in technology sales. It's more like 35 years in sales. I think I've been doing technology sales since 1998, right? So whatever that number is, 25, whatever that number is. Where I am today, 58 years old. Pretty much been working my whole life. I work for a flash-based data storage company that I've been at for about 8.5 years. In September 2024, I will be at this company for 10 years. And it'll be the third company I'm at for 10 years since I got out of college. Got out of college in 1998. So I've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, well, this will be exciting. Where were you in 1998, Natasha?
Let's see.
Whatever 6-year-olds are doing.
Okay.
I wasn't going to bring that up. You took it there. I wasn't going to say anything.
Well, let's jump right into it. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up, what that was like, and family, a lot of kids, not a lot of kids,
Yeah.
a little bit about your background.
So I was born in San Francisco, but my earliest time in life that I remember, we lived in Walnut Creek, which is in the East Bay. In 1978, when I was 13, we moved to Boise, Idaho. My dad took a job there, and kind of a different environment than living in the Bay Area to move to Boise, Idaho, especially in 1978. I went through junior high school, a couple years of college. During that time, when I was 19, my dad passed away, and for the next several years, I lived with my mom. I was living at home with my mom. I was going to school full time. I was working full time, and as you probably have guessed, I was going out every night, right? And I did that for a few years, and I realized, hey, something's got to give. At this rate, I will never graduate from college. So I packed up my things. I moved to San Francisco to finish college. And when I graduated in 1988, I took a job up here in Sacramento. I bought a house here in Rockland in 1994. And then I got married in 1998, and we've got two boys now. So,
All right, well, let's go back to your high school years. So you're getting ready to graduate high school. Are you thinking about college? Did you know what your path was? Take us through your thought process on what you wanted to do there.
Good question. So I never really enjoyed school much, right? In high school, I didn't do that great. I did a lot of messing around. I wasn't that great of a student. The last thing I really wanted to do was go to college and study more, right? Yet my parents kept encouraging me, you're going to go to college, you're going to go to college, you're going to go to college. And I don't actually think that they encouraged my sibling. I'm one of 5 kids. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. And I should say that I'm the youngest of 5 kids that they had in 6 years. Right?
Oh, wow.
Oh,
There's a lot going on in
my
our house.
goodness.
Right? And, there's no doubt in my mind that I was the baby. I was spoiled more than the rest of them. I don't think they encouraged my siblings to go to college as much as they did me. So they kept pressing and they kept pressing and they kept pressing. And I didn't really sort of buy off on the concept of going to college. I think until, like I mentioned, my dad passed and I realized, I don't have a lot of safety nets left. So I better get my stuff together and do something with my life. And so that's sort of what I did. And that's when I decided at that point, there's no debating it. I have to go to college, right? And as much as I hated studying, I hated the work, I hated all the stuff that came with it, except for the fun part. I knew that I had to go to college. So,
had your siblings? Did they go to? Your parents didn't push it, but did any of them go to college?
Yeah. So my oldest sister, who's 6 years older than me, she went to Cal Poly. She got a communications degree. The next one down was my brother Jack. He grew up working in a grocery store. It got so stressful later in his life. I can't remember how old he was. I bet he was, maybe in his 20s or something, where he gave up his whole career and he ended up going back to college. And actually not only got his bachelor's, but he got his master's as well. Then my other brother and sister, they sort of dabbled. My sister dabbled in college, but never really finished.
Interesting. So you're at 19, your father passes away. Were you two close? And what was the impact on your life at that time?
No, I don't think we were too close. I think so. He had a lot of challenges, probably the 3 or 4 years before he died, and he was busy. My mom didn't really work a lot. My mom eventually went back to teaching the last several years of his life, but I wouldn't characterize us as being that close, right? So he was, for the most part, up until maybe I was 15 or 16, he was a great dad. I think after that he started having some challenges, and so we weren't really close probably the last 3 or 4 years.
And so when you think back in where you're at now in life and the influence he had, would you say he had a big influence on who you are as an adult? Not too big? What was his impact on the way you live your life now?
I wouldn't say he had a big impact on my life from a mentor perspective. I sort of saw things that were happening to him and things that he was doing, I guess. And I guess the biggest impact is I wanted to make sure that I didn't take the same path he did. Right. Okay. So that's probably the biggest impact. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So 19, you decide to go to college and you start off in Boise, or you
start off in Boise. So once I got out of high school, I started going to college just because, I was supposed to. At that point, I wasn't really thinking on my own, right? It's just like my parents told me to go to college. So I went to college, right? And I was working, and then once he passed, I realized I had to go to college, and I kept going to college. But then again, like I said, I just couldn't fit everything in, and I realized I can't stay here. And it became my biggest fear that I would never finish college. Right? I'd be like, even if you took one course a year, you're never going to finish college, right? So I thought I have to get out of this environment. I packed up my bags. Like I said, I moved to San Francisco and finished college there.
And so is that because you were having too good of a time? Or what was holding you back from being focused on school?
Yeah.
Discipline, right? So I had a great, the thing is I lived with my mom, right? I lived there rent free. She paid for all the food. I was working at, when I left the grocery store in 1985 to move to San Francisco, I was making $11.50 an hour, right? In 1985. And I thought I was rich. I had more money than I ever thought I ever needed. And one thing that inspired me is I was working in the grocery store and I looked at the check stand next to me, and this guy, great guy, his name was Mike Portello. And I'm sort of looking at him and I'm like, so he's working in the same grocery store as I am, right? He makes 25 cents more per hour, right? Because he's like an assistant manager. He carries a key, right? He's got a wife and he's got 3 kids. And I'm like, I feel like I got more money than I need, but he had to buy a house. He's got to buy a car. His wife didn't work, all this other stuff. I'm like, there's no way that I can make ends meet when I get older like that. So I have to go and figure out a way to sort of get out of this grocery store and get something, more challenging and more rewarding, I guess I would say.
Yeah. So at 19, that forward thinking, so big risk. You're looking at the guy next to you, going to have married and have kids. I can't do it 25 cents more. You're going to move to San Francisco. Massive change in life. Yeah. Did you know people in San Francisco? Did you have a support system there?
Yeah. So my parents grew up in San Francisco, right? Both my parents did. And when we lived in Walnut Creek in the East Bay, we used to spend a lot of time in San Francisco. All my parents' siblings lived there, right? My aunts, my uncles. I had cousins that lived there. So, you don't. I probably wouldn't do something like that unless I had some sort of safety net. And they were sort of the safety. I knew that if things got bad, I could go to my aunt's house, right? So it was around that time. It was somewhere around that time when I was 19 or so, when I realized that San Francisco was probably my favorite city in the world, right? And I always say it's the only place I'd live in this world that has that kind of weather. But I loved it that much. And when I went and visited with my cousin, because he went there, I walked down at San Francisco State. We started at the top of campus, and we walked down. As we got about halfway down, I said, "There's no doubt in my mind, I'm going here," right? And that's when I decided to go.
And when you went there, did you know what you wanted to do?
Yeah. So I had, there was a guy I knew in Boise, he was my best friend, and his dad's name was Bob Fox. Interesting story about Bob Fox. So he was a marketing director for Coors Light back in the day, back in the late 70s, I guess 80s. And fun fact is he and his team actually came up with the tagline, "The Silver Bullet" for Coors Light.
Oh, wow.
So fun fact. As things started to go sideways with my dad a little bit, I spent more and more time at their house, and he didn't know it. He might have known it, but I sort of saw him as a mentor. Right? We would do things like he would take customers hunting, or we'd go away for the weekend. We'd do all these stuff. He was really involved in his kids' life. He played hoop with. He's a little bit like you. Played hoop with his kids. We went hunting. We went fishing. We played golf together. It was like my best friend Steve, his dad, and me. We just sort of hung out. And I sort of noticed that when we'd go on some of these business trips with him, like we'd have dinner and he'd pull out the American Express. It was his company card. I'm like, wow, this dude has a job where his company pays for his stuff. And so I'm really setting my sights high, right? So I wasn't going to be a doctor or a lawyer, but hey, if I can get my expenses paid for, that's great. So I really looked up to this guy, right? And that sort of encouraged me to continue on. And that's when I really started thinking. My cousin was in sales. I had other people that were surrounded by me, and it just sort of felt like sales was the right thing for me. It didn't intimidate me. It sort of just felt like it was something I really wanted to do.
And so we talk a lot about mentors here. And so Bob, have you ever told him that he had that impact and kind of gave you a path to your career? Does he know that the influence he had on you?
So I recently, his son and I, Steve, sort of parted ways after a number of years, but I stay in touch with Bob's other son. His name's Derek. And I never got a chance to tell Bob because he died a number of years ago. And it's a great question because I think in my head, boy, I wish I had. But when he was having this impact on me, I'm not sure I was really mature enough to sort of put those thoughts together and say this is something I should do. As time went on, I started to think on my own. That's one of the things that I regret. So I bet he passed 15, 20 years ago. So.
I think that is fascinating because that's one of the things as we talk to people and hear their stories. I'm always curious if in the moment, sometimes we don't understand the impact or take the lesson, or it's a lot of hindsight, right? 2020 looking back,
yes.
That was impactful. And so to say that at the time, you're living it, you don't really know it. And then you look back and you're like, oh, that was, major.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I would teach maybe the millennials of the day is, certain things as I grew in a Catholic family, was very structured. We went to church every single weekend, regardless of what was happening. But I don't think I really felt the freedom to sort of speak what's on my mind. And probably the last 10 years, especially with this company I work with now, we operate under total transparency. And I love that. Right. Yeah. And it's sort of, as I've gotten older now in my 50s, it took me so long to realize that going to that individual and telling him what an impact he had on me is something that I really wish I had done. So.
Yeah. And I think it's, we talk about the millennials, but it's just as important for us, at the, we'll call it 40 plus grandpa age. Okay.
Sure.
To understand the impact that we have on people's lives when we're taking them out to dinner or we're just having a conversation. I often forget, and it's a casual conversation and someone will come back and say, hey, that meant something. I made a decision. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, what? If I would have known that, I might have, polished it up a bit. But to the people of our or any generation, it should be an important takeaway is we have impact on people that we don't necessarily recognize, but we should. We should take the time to know that every conversation is important in the decision-making. People are influenced by what we say and do.
There's no doubt. Yeah.
So college.
Yeah.
College.
What was your major? So you said sales seemed like it was for you.
Yeah. So it was business with an emphasis on marketing, right? My original major was advertising, and as I started to do the work for advertising, the one thing I realized is I don't want to be in advertising, right? So I sort of switched it. It's a small switch. It's business is business, right?
Yeah.
So I went marketing, and I don't want to send the wrong message, but my younger son tells me all the time that what he's learning in college, he's never ever going to use, and that's an old ad. It's an old thought, and unfortunately, it's really true, right? But to me, I think when you go to college, it's not obviously, and this is again an old thought. It's not about what you learn in college. It's all the experiences that you have around it. I mean, I was able to go I lived in Walnut Creek in the big state of California. I moved to Idaho. At the time, there were 1 million people in the whole state, right? There's 40 million here in California. There's 1 million people in Idaho. But had I grown up in Idaho, I probably would have never gone to San Francisco because it's too big and it's too diverse and it's too all this other stuff. But I remembered it from my youth and I really enjoyed it. So when I got there, I really embraced it. And I met some of the greatest people there, my friends, right? And I just had a great time. I did not want to leave there, to move to Sacramento and take a job, but I did.
Are you still friends with? You still have friends from that?
Yeah, still talk after all these years. We sort of lost contact with some of them. Some of them have come back. We've all had got married, had families. Talked about, helped each other with our jobs, advice, those types of things. So it's been great.
So I'm going to dive in there a little bit. So when you think about college, and I ended up going into the Marine Corps, and I had friends there, and there's friends that you make and you think are going to be there for life, and you realize at some point that you have to part ways.
Yes.
For whatever the reason is. So what would your advice be to those that are listening that feel like they have to hold on to that friendship? And, we went to college together, we grew up together, and they're just not on the same path anymore. And they're struggling with, I owe them something. I need to have them in my wedding, or I need to have them in part of my life. And they're 20, 25, 30.
Right.
What's your worldly advice there?
I guess when you look at a friend, I always tell my wife that, a friend is a nonverbal if I'm going to be your friend, Natasha, we have an agreement. It's a contract, right? I'm going to provide some value to you, right? And you've become a great friend of mine, right? You and I wouldn't be friends if, we weren't providing value to each other, right? There's something, I love hanging out with you and Amy. I think you enjoy hanging out with Kim and I.
I do, love it.
And that's kind of why we're friends. And I think, it's something that when I think of the friends who we sort of parted ways with, it's either they changed or I changed, right? And not placing any blame. But there's one guy in particular that I lost touch with for probably 25 years. And he's just now sort of coming back into sort of my life. And I think about, I think anytime you look at something like that, you got to think to yourself, okay, well, the reason I quit hanging out with him was, A, B, and C. But I also think you have to look internally and say, okay, well, was I completely without fault? No. There are things I could have done, A, B, and C. And had I done that, maybe we wouldn't have parted. So I think of that kind of stuff all the time.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also important to think of on whatever the path is. So however we define success, and we'll get there. There's people that are going to usher you through to success, and those that are going to, be challenged, whether it's going out and drinking till 5 a.m. and you have to be at work at 8, or
right.
They're just telling you this isn't, your dream isn't worth it. We have to have those conversations, to your point, and say, you know what, maybe it's better. We take some time apart, come back, and we can still be friends. But I have a vision that I'm trying to achieve, and you have yours. Let's see where we end up, and have those conversations quite a bit with my kids. And so, anyways, wanted your perspective on it. So appreciate it.
And I think that we changed. So in my spot right now, right, we are where we're at, but I think underestimating sometimes that you're changing, or I wouldn't say so much feeling the obligation to stay friends, but the disappointment when you don't. And it's like, well, you're in your part of life. You have your priorities. I have mine, and then we realized, oh yeah, I'm different than I was when I'm 20. I'm different than I was when I was, however.
And I think that's okay. Like, even if you had this great friendship and you guys started parting ways and you never got back together, that's probably how it was meant to be, right? And there's a reason that happened. And I don't think it's worth, I think it's worth it to look inside and figure out what you could have done differently. But don't beat yourself up about it. It's just the way that things happen, right? I've got a few friends that are like that I have lost touch with, and I will probably never talk to again. Yeah,
and you cherish the memories, and you make new ones with new people.
That's right.
So college, coming to graduation. You graduate college. How old are you? You single? You're married at this time? Playing the field?
1998. So I had a number of challenges. Once I graduated from high school, I took a couple years off. So it took me 6 years to get through college. So it's 1998. I had a good friend back from Boise who had helped me when I was in the grocery store, get a job with, like, when I was in college, sort of part-time during the summers, all kinds of stuff. with Nabisco, selling cookies and crackers. And I built up all this experience while I was in, when I was really young, all the way through when I graduated from college. And when I graduated from college, I went to Europe for 2 months. I came back. I had absolutely no money. I stayed on the couch of what is now my best friend's family. I sat there watching TV all day, and I realized I can't sustain this life, though I'd like to. So I started putting my resume together, and I got a call from this guy who had started me in with, he was actually our Nabisco rep in my grocery store. That's how I met him. And he had sort of helped me with all sorts of things. I was a merchandiser for him. He got me this summer job as a fill-in rep for Nabisco when I was going through college. Even when I went to San Francisco, I'd come back to Boise and take that job. And like if I'd have stayed in California, I'd have made more money and I'd have had a better time, but I knew that I was going to need this experience, right? So I did it 100% for the experience. So when I got back from Europe, sitting on the couch and the phone rings and he's like, hey, this is John. The guy up in Sacramento is looking for a full-time sales rep for Nabisco. He's like, you want to do it? So I'm like, well, now it's decision time. So I have two options. I can put my resume together. I knew I had the Nabisco. I thought I had the Nabisco thing wired. I'd been there, I'd done that, whatever. I can go after that job, and I think I could probably do it. And I think I could probably do it well because of my experience. Or I could put some extra work in, get my resume together, pound the pavement, and go out and get a job that might be something new and something exciting.
Yeah.
So I went after the Nabisco job, and it was nothing other than sheer laziness. Right. I'm like, hey, I can walk through that door, right? Or I can walk around, right? So I can take the long path, the tough path. And I had no money. I'm just like, I'm going to take this job. So that brought me up to Sacramento, right? And I worked, for Nabisco, and I spent 10 years doing that. I started as a sales rep, going into grocery stores, ordering products, selling displays, all that other stuff. And I got promoted to an account manager, a district manager, and I probably could have made a living at it. One of my best friends made a living where I met him at Nabisco. He made a living at it. He made a great living for his family. But I started to sort of get bored, right?
So before we get to your board, let's come back a little bit. So for those that aren't in the industry, Natasha and I are in sales. So I always tell her, I was like, we're in insurance sales. I was like, I can sell pineapples, I can sell cars. You're selling cookies, right? So you're at Nabisco. So tell everybody not the product necessarily, but how are you honing in your skill set, your profession of sales? What does that take when you're talking to people? You're not look at this cookie. Like what is it? What's the sales process? How are you learning?
I think by doing, and I think I've always sort of learned, whether it's sales or whatever part of life, by stealing shamelessly, right? I look at people who are successful, and I think to myself, okay, what do I like about them? Okay, so stay away from that. But what are they doing that's making them successful, right? When you're working for Nabisco, it's the largest cookie and cracker company in the world, right? So, when you go to work for Nabisco, it's not like they want you to go out and sell a package of Oreos. That's already done, right? All their marketing takes care of that. They want you to go get an end display and sell all this other stuff through the store. So I just looked at people around me and said, that individual is successful. And that's when I sort of started to, be curious and start asking questions. So how did you approach this? How did you approach this? How did you approach this? Right. And if they said, hey, I don't have time for you, then I'm like, hey, that's fine. I just go on and ask someone else. But just sort of through osmosis and building relationships from those who were making the decisions. Right.
And did you have a process as far as self-improvement? Were you reading books? How were you getting better? How were you honing your craft?
I didn't really start honing my craft because this was, one reason I left Nabisco is it became repetitious, right? I would say that we worked really hard, but the job in and of itself was easy, and it wasn't challenging to me. And I kept looking at my friends over in technology saying, I like technology. And I had, when Nabisco gave me a computer, I was all over that thing, right? I'm figuring out how it works, how it can make my life easier. Yet I thought to myself, well, I could never sell. I'm not smart enough to sell technology, right? And really, what I found, and I've told a number of friends this, it's not about the tech. You don't have to know the technology. You don't have to you have to understand how to relate to people, right? And then once you understand how to relate to people, you have to understand what it is about your product that they would want, and then you have to be able to communicate that to them. So that's sort of what I did, right? I got a little bored with Nabisco, and I'm like, I need a challenge. And I also, the way I was being paid at Nabisco was more of a sort of a group. It's like, hey, I was being my commission or my bonus was based on what the region did. And I'm like, I don't have a direct impact.
Yeah.
Right? Like I might be able to stay in bed and I'd make the same amount of money. And I really was hungry to go and have it be on me. Right. So I found a way into technology sales and really enjoyed the fact that if I don't make any money, it's because I'm not getting out of bed in the morning. So.
And you mentioned your titles changed at Nabisco before you left. Did you have people reporting to you?
No.
Were you managing? What was some of, is that you've always wanted to have a leadership role, or what was that journey like?
I didn't go into Nabisco thinking, it's interesting. And my older son, I think, is starting to realize this. I take the job at Nabisco and I'm like, well, I can't be a manager. I'm not smart enough to be a manager. Right. But what I did when I came up to Sacramento is I just worked really hard. I worked hard and I figured out a way to be efficient and figure out a way to hit my number and do all this stuff. And then one day they called and said, hey, we're thinking about promoting you. I'm like, who are you talking to? Right. And what I realized is a lot of the folks, when I moved into management, I sort of looked around and I said, a lot of great people here, but I don't know that they're really any better than me or worse than me or whatever.
Oh my gosh, you're speaking to me. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a secret nobody tells you. They're all just figuring it out too.
And it all comes down, Natasha, to my son's going through that now, right? Yeah. He's been able to do some things where he's like, I didn't know that I was qualified. I'm like, it's kind of like when I went into technology sales. I'm like, I don't know anything about technology. And I get into the technology world. I'm like, there's a bunch of me's around here, right? There's not, I had put them on a pedestal and they probably didn't belong there, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a hugely important lesson as we talk to wherever somebody's at in their career, the next level, it's all a bunch of us. They're figuring it out as well. And they wake up like us, and, one pant leg at a time, and they go into work, and there's some good, there's some bad, but anybody can be anything that they want to be. They just have to take that chance and go figure it out.
Totally agree. Yeah.
You go from Nabisco into technology, so there's a theme with you where that's a big move. People moving careers and changing. Again, big change in life. Scary at the time? Was it a big leap of faith? What's your thought process? You had gone to San Francisco. You had a support system there. Did you have a support system here? And what was your thought process as far as overcoming some of those natural fears of changing in careers and learning something new?
Yeah, well, I had met a guy, or I hung out with a guy in college who, really sharp guy, and he went straight from college into technology sales. And when we'd meet and have a couple of beers, he's like, dude, you got to come over here. What are you doing over there? I'm like, hey, I kind of like it. It's, it doesn't pay that great, but I have all these great experiences. He's like, you come over and do what I'm doing. And he worked selling phone switches, right? So it's like a call center type. You've got a call center, right? So it used to not be all network based, right? There were T1s and all the stuff that a lot of people don't understand, especially millennials.
I put down a tally.
That's right. There you go. So he's like, come on. I'm like, dude, I can't sell technology. He's like, it's not. So he introduced me to a guy who sort of became a little bit of a professional mentor. When I say a little bit, it's like, it's not a guy that we had an agreement he would be a mentor. It's just, even to this day, when I've had some challenges or I wanted to move positions or whatever, he's one of the first guys I would call, because he's very well networked, right? He could pick up a phone and say, hey, you got to talk to this Mike Portello, and he's, I think, and he would refer me, right? So I came over, and it was for the first number of years, it was really slow, and I did have there's no doubt I had my doubts, right? So, because I'm like, how does this work? It's not like me going and selling a display of wheat thins, right? It's like, I've got to understand the technology. I've got a technical counterpart who does all, which was great, because, sales guys or sales folks generally aren't that technical. And I just sort of leaned on them the first number of years until it sort of started clicking about how this whole thing should work, right? Technical person's the technical person. I'm the salesperson. I'm the quarterback. I push the process forward. But when it gets too deep technically, I refer to my counterpart. So that's sort of how, over the course of years, the first company I worked at for 2 years, the next one 2 years. And then I stumbled on this job with a data storage company it was the second company that I ended up being at for 10 years. So.
How old were you and I guess what age time frame were you in those?
When I left Nabisco and so I graduated college in 88, so 98. So I was born in 64. So I was 34. That was my math.
34. Yeah. And single at this time, married?
No, I had just, let's see, when I was at Nabisco, I think right when I left, maybe a year or so after I left Nabisco, I got married.
Okay. Yeah. And so what was your process in changing careers and learning this new industry? How did you attack it?
There was an executive at the first company I worked for, and he said these words to me. He said, "You need to become a student of your trade." And it sort of resonated with me because I'm like, okay, student of your trade. Now that doesn't mean that you have to know, if you're selling iPhones, you don't have to know how an iPhone works, right? You have to understand the cell phone market. You have to understand why somebody would want to buy an iPhone, why they'd want to buy an iPhone ahead of buying an Android or some of these other things, right? And so that really sort of resonated with me, that I've got to figure out a way to make these connections with people just to have the conversation about how to sell what it is I was selling. So I did some reading. That's when I started reading books, Spin Selling, Crossing the Chasm, some of these other ones that really sort of made me think. I've got a couple of friends who had been doing, I always felt free to call them if I had a challenge, or I'm like, hey, I'm struggling. I can't seem to crack in the door or whatever. What are some of the things that you're doing that maybe can help, right? So, I believe I believe one of the things I would tell the youth of today is don't be afraid to ask for help. Yeah. And as a result, you have to pay it forward. Whether you could pay it back if you want to, but you definitely have to pay it forward to other people to help them out as well.
So how important, you had talked about along those lines, a gentleman you had called, and he had the network, the people he knew to help you get referrals. So as you're calling these people to help you, how important has your network over the 35 plus years been important to your career?
It's so valuable. Just the other night, I went out with four other guys, and we had dinner, and we talked about, they're getting sort of up there in age as I am. We're talking about what retirement looks like, what we have to think about, and it's funny. You run into people, if I were to advise, one of my things to advise the younger generation is don't be that person who only calls when you need help, right? So, and it's sort of that thing, do good when nobody's looking, right? That kind of thing. So the network, I would probably very top of the list, networking. And not networking's like, hey, can you get me into this account? Or hey, can you almost become a friend first, right? A trusted friend. Spend some time doing stuff, having a beer, doing whatever, and maybe go out to a basketball game or whatever, and don't talk about work, right? You get those relationships. It's funny, Anthony, you and I have this little friend group here in Rockland. There's probably 5 or 6 of us here, and then there's more than that. But I think that 5 or 6 of us. I feel like if I had knocked on your door and needed help, you'd be there in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
And I think this little group we have, I think every one of them, husbands and wives, would do that. So sort of expand that to some extent professionally. It's like I can, if I was struggling at my job today and I wanted to go, there's many people I could call that would help me. And it's very important that I pay that forward again to other people when they need help as well.
And so that investment in the dinners or the basketball games, the obvious answer is, yeah, it's important. But do you feel like you sacrificed, nights and evenings or times to make that happen at the time? And maybe you look back and say it wasn't a sacrifice, it was an investment.
Yeah, I think it was an investment. I think still to this day, I don't do enough of it, right? I mean, it's, forget about COVID and all that other stuff. But sometimes there's things, oftentimes I think I should be downtown Sacramento having a beer with a customer or a network partner or whatever. But yeah, I could see, my whole thing in life is sort of balance. How can you be successful in life, whatever that is? Doesn't mean financially, doesn't mean whatever it means to you. But how can you do that and have balance? So I've tried to be efficient in the way that I've taken time away to get in my car, go down, spend the night or spend the evening having a beer or whatever. And so I try to be as efficient as I can in sort of going through that process.
Love it.
So can I ask you some lessons learned?
Of course.
So in this, journey, so it's a wide gap, 20 to 35, 40. I mean, for the question.
Yes.
What a way to prep. That's not what I meant. So lessons learned. If you look back, what were some of the, it sounds like you're finding your way, you're changing jobs, you're learning all this good stuff, but I'm assuming there's some hard parts in there, some lessons, some mistakes.
A ton. I think I mentioned it before that, the importance of having a mentor, right? And maybe not just one for your personal life, but maybe your professional life, maybe more than one of people that can sort of help you, get through that process quicker. Right. And when I think about some of the mistakes I made when I was at this last data storage company, I was there for 10 years. And probably the last 3 years, there was an individual that he wasn't necessarily my manager, but I sort of dotted line to him. And he had this, when he came into the environment, there were probably 17 people on the team, and he sort of started picking one off and replacing them one after another. And I'm thinking to myself, I wonder when it's my time, right?
What spot in line am I?
Yes. Am I next?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think he had his reasons, right? Maybe thought he could find better people, whatever. But as time went on, we started to get in this little political battle, right? And he was down at our corporate headquarters, which is down in Santa Clara. I was up here. And the one thing I didn't do really well is I didn't network very well within that organization. So when it came time for him and I to sort of start butting heads, it's like I ended up leaving after 10 years because I'm like, I'm losing this political battle. And I was, right? And so I felt the need that I had to leave that organization. Interesting part about that. When this guy came in, I thought he was the biggest idiot in the world. And quite frankly, I think he is, right? He was so good at his job. He had this inability to connect with people personally, right? So as mad as I was when I lost this political battle to him, he did a very good job networking. As mad as I was and as ticked off as I was, I will tell you that there's probably 3 to 4 things that I learned from him that I use today.
Oh, I want to hear them.
Yeah,
all of
that's hard to take something from something that you really, an experience or a person that you just don't. So to take a lesson from that is.
Yeah, it sort of goes back to looking inside when we're talking about losing friends, right? If you've lost 3 friends in your life and you'll never see them again, is it all them? Right. Probably not. It's probably some you, right? And I looked at this and I said, well, I could have done this better. I could have done this better. I could have networked better. I could have reached out to him more and not have this wall between us just because I didn't like him, right? And I think that when I think of the things that he actually taught me, and I do think to myself once in a while, I wonder should I go back and talk to him? But I still think he's an idiot. Oh. But anyways,
you should, except for if he knows who you're talking about. And listens to
he won't. Yeah, he's. I think he's long gone. But I think you have to be objective in that sense. It's like, hey, I did a couple of things wrong. I probably could have handled some things differently, but I did take these 3 or 4 things away from him that are really valuable. And these 3 or 4 things are really around how to act in front of a customer, some of the things to say, how to ask a question, maybe a slightly uncomfortable sales question, right? How to do that. And I use some of those techniques today.
I love it. So when I hear political battle, long political battle, and they happen in every organization, and there's positioning, it could be empire building, it could be power struggle. Did you know that you were in a, for lack of a better term, a fight at the time of a battle?
Yeah, I knew it. And again, I was if there were 13 or 15 people on the team, I was probably number 7 or 8, right? It was my time, right? And I think that he would have probably outworked me to make sure that I went and did something else so that he could put somebody else in my place. He had his reasons, right? I don't really know. I never really understood what they were, but that's just sort of what happened.
And so when you look back and you reflect, can you say to yourself, why was I in this battle? I was spending this time and energy to try and win something that I could have just partnered with the guy, or I could have just pivoted and left.
Right.
Like, what advice would you have? Like, people going through this all the time, they're like, they get caught up in the personality conflict and that political battle. Mm-hmm. Your advice when you look back, not just this experience, all of them, go after it, win the fight.
Well, I think of the reason why we got in this battle, and I'll just give you a small microcosm of what happened. So we talk about developing business, reaching out to more customers and developing business. He would tell the whole team, "Hey, you got to get out there. You got to be out there developing more business. You got to meet with more people. And what I found is, I'm like, he's probably right. We as a team need to do a better job. So when anyone would start doing that, he'd say, look, you got to think on your own. You got to think on your own. But when you would start to develop this business and you'd have a sync, sit around talking about what you did this week, it was constant critiquing about your approach. Why didn't you do it this way? Why didn't you do it this way? And I'm thinking to myself, you want me to sort of think on my own, but then you're you're critiquing the way that you're critiquing my style. So I couldn't live in that type of world. It's just like, I do not, my wife will tell you, my mom will tell you, everyone will tell you. Generally speaking, I don't like to be told what to do, right? It's just probably a personality flaw. I don't know what it is. But, and I knew that I could have invested more energy in maintaining or mending that relationship, but that in and of itself was not going to keep me right. That was going to make me want to go do something else. I could not work with this individual. Personality, conflict, whatever it was.
Sometimes that happens. You have to part ways.
Yeah.
Yes. So any other leaders in your journey, style-wise, that really developed you? Or either way, same thing, maybe other tough leaders or ones that you're like, wow, this really...
there's one thing that I really... The company I work for, I think I'm probably employee 612, and we're probably at 5,000 now. And I took this, interesting how I got this job, or how I ended up at this job. But once I got this job, we do these things called QBRs, quarterly business reviews. Mm-hmm. And we come in a room, and there's maybe 8 of us account execs, and we present what we did last quarter, what we're going to do this quarter. And because this company I work for was a startup at the time, it's like, the great thing about startups is if something needs to be done, you just do it. And there's no, as companies get bigger, everything fits in a box, right? So you're just like, hey, if you want to do this, you have to follow this process. But back when they're startups, you just did it, and you figured out a way to, do whatever's best for the company, the partner, or the customer. And we're sitting in this QBR, and we're there all day, and you have like an hour each or 45 minutes each. And you tend to get off on tangents, and there's 25 people in the room. And one guy's presenting, and somebody asks a question, and then we start talking about their sidebars. And the guy who our regional manager who was running it, all of a sudden says out loud, "Are we really effing talking about this right now?" And he sort of yells that, and the room goes silent. And I got the chills. I'm like, I am in the right spot. because of the candor and the transparency. We're not, you don't have to sit around and think about, when you hang out with Anthony, you don't have to think about what Anthony's thinking, because he's going to tell you, right? And I truly got the chills. I'm like, I am in the right spot. This is great, because if I'm screwing up, I don't want someone to beat around the bush. Just tell me. If I've done great, just tell me, Yeah. So I think that was one. He's one leader. He's gone from the company or whatever, but that's one little thing that I sort of respected him for.
Yeah, really took that with you.
Yeah.
So, from the outside looking in, Mike, I know you, so I know a little bit about your background. I just wanted to touch on advice to those that are coming up in their early 20s. I know we're in California, you have a couple homes here. Mm-hmm. Boise, you have homes. Going to Mexico, have a home there. What's your advice to those kids coming up as far as investment in the way that you manage your life and things in general? And then I'm going to follow that up with a question on how you define success. But let's start there on the advice.
Well, I think I'm certainly not an expert when it comes to investing. I truly am not. I'm a novice at best, I think. But I can tell you that I have a genuine interest in, when I started, I got my first rental house, right? We're living here in Rockland and in a 2,400 square foot house, and my kids were bouncing off the walls. We ended up buying a house, a couple blocks away. And I think I grew up with the natural way of, hey, if you're going to buy a new house, you got to sell your other one. And then I thought to myself, I'm like, wait, I started running the numbers. I'm like, we can probably have some sort of positive cash flow from day one if we rent this thing out. So I'm like, well, that makes sense. It's a very basic thought, right? As somebody paying my mortgage, and I'm making a couple $100 extra a month. I get to own this house. And after a certain number of years, it's going to appreciate. I'll be able to sell it and take that money. The thing that struck me, I started buying a couple more houses in Boise because I had this sense that Boise had already started to explode. And I sort of sensed that it wasn't done exploding. And I thought, as I'm getting older, right, and if I do want to retire early, I have to figure out a way to, and I can't draw from my 401k yet. I got to pay for healthcare. I don't have Medicare. I don't have all that other stuff. This is a great way to generate passive income. I could have taken that money, invested in, maybe I'd have done better, but it's a little bit of a hobby for me. I sort of liked the concept of owning these different homes and renting them out and figuring out what rent is worth, putting the right people in there. So it's a little bit of hobby for me, and it might be something that I'd like to continue to do when I retire, right? So I'm not selling hardware anymore. I'm not selling technology, but maybe something that keeps me busy, but also generates some additional passive income.
Yeah, I see you on the golf course, Mike.
You can only play so much golf, right?
So the follow-up question to that, how do you define success? What's your definition of success?
For me, it's balance, right? So cliche, I know, but it really is. It's funny that as I get older and I think all these cliches, they all really start to make sense, right?
I thought the same thing. I'm like, oh, this is how they become such a thing. They're actually true.
And I have, for the last, 25, 30 years, I've strived for balance. And during those times, my life has been massively out of balance, right? I sort of liken it to golf, right? So, 65 is a pretty good score in golf. I will never shoot a 65, right? And I know that. I mean, I will never shoot a 65, but I still go out and I play golf, right? So my life I have never found the ultimate balance in my life, right? So you got family, you have your wife, you have your kids, you have finances, you have your job, you have your social activity, you have your all this stuff. How do you sort of keep that in balance? I think, to me, that's success, where some of the mistakes I think that I made is, and some of this has to do with my father passing, but I'm like, some of my when I was going to school and when I started working, it was like an internal white knuckle ride for me. I was way out of balance because I thought, I have to graduate from college. That's the only thing that's important, except for going out every night. I got a job. I have to be successful. And that's not healthy, right? And I learned the hard way that that's not healthy. So I define success as balance in the way you live your life, your social life, your family, your work, your whatever your hobbies are, that type of thing. So.
And do you feel successful? Do you feel you've done that by your definition?
Again, it's like shooting 65. I don't know that it's something that I'm cognizant of, and something that it was probably 4 years ago. I realized that I can't continue to live this internal white knuckle ride, right? It's just not, I was telling my best friend about it the other day. It's like, when I was in college, he's like, God, I had no idea you were. I'm like, yeah, I got to graduate, whatever. It was about 4 years ago when I met with my financial guy. And I'm like, so how much do I need to, it was all intense. How much do I need to retire by? He's like, Mike, relax. You could retire today if you wanted. And that just sort of opened up my mind, because I'm like, okay, you have to stop stressing because you're going to have a heart attack or a stroke by the time you're 60.
Yeah, you won't be able to enjoy it.
You got to relax, right? So those are some of the things that sort of made me open my eyes to this.
Good.
So, I'm just coming really with the millennial question. So stages, I guess like stages, sometimes we talk about life in terms of decades, right? Your 20s, your 30s, your 40s. So with that, the stress and just the change in you and the thought process, as you look over that time, does anything stand out, how you feel about it today, you never would have felt like that at a younger stage. And I just, anything there, like is it experience, is it time, is it age? Do you think everybody gets to that point, or did you have to really work for it?
I think the youth of today, for lack of a better word, it's funny. Like when I was growing up, I didn't think I really had, I could always move. I did have a safety net. I could always, if everything fell off the cliff, I could always go and move back with my mom. Mm-hmm. I think our kids have more safety nets than I like to see my kids challenged. I like to see them figure out things on their own, right? Back when I managed people, right, when I was at Nabisco, I managed probably 10 sales reps for probably 4 years or so. And I used to tell them, I'd say, look, don't bring me problems, right? Mm-hmm. Bring me, it's really kind of it's not even a cliche. It's just kind of an odd thing. But I say, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. Really what I meant by that is don't come and whine to me. Mm-hmm. So come to me and tell me what the problem is. But the first thing after that out of your mouth should be what you think we should do, right? Mm-hmm. Don't make me do your thinking for you, right? Mm-hmm. It'll give me a kickstart. And between you and I, we can sort of figure that out. So I try to pass that on to my kids. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but that's sort of one thing that I sort of try to pass on to my kids. Yeah.
And business wise, any lessons or things, like you mentioned, a big one for me right now is like you said, I realized I'm like, I'm at this table with all these people I used to think were like way out in the distance, right? And I'm like, hold on, I can hang, so I can be here. So at your point in life right now and business wise, is that it just different for you? Are you, just you're comfortable and you can be the candid person?
Great question. And I liken it to a basketball team. Give me a really good basketball team. So you got the
Milwaukee Bucks.
You got the Milwaukee Bucks. Give me a really bad one. Maybe I can't think, but
I can't think either.
I guess my point is you got a really good basketball team. Mm-hmm. You got a really kind of crappy basketball team. When they get together, and maybe the really good basketball team is trying to make the playoffs, and the really bad basketball team is like, the really bad basketball team starts playing more free. Right. Yeah. The good basketball team is like, again, an internal white knuckle. Right? I have to make this three. I have to do. And often you'll find that the bad basketball team ends up beating the good basketball team, right? Because they're playing more free. When my financial guy told me that I could retire today if I wanted to, that allowed me. I think I'd already started sort of down that journey. That allowed me to play more free, take more risks, speak more freely, right? Where in the past I may not have felt that free to do that. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll ask the last question. I think Natasha might have forgot about it. So when you were 12,
I was like, which one? I'm so new.
When you were 12, is this where you saw yourself? Is this the career path that you saw?
Good one. Yes, you're right. How could I?
When I was 12, I didn't think on my own at 12. I didn't start thinking on my own until I was.
We're dreamers 20. At 12, though. We're dreamers.
I think maybe at 12, is it too old to still want to be a baseball player professionally? I don't know. Maybe later in my life, I didn't know what I wanted to do up until I ran into this Bob Fox and knew I wanted to do something similar to what he was doing. Yeah.
So, any more questions from you, Natasha?
Now you put me on the spot. I don't think so.
Okay. So before we wrap up, it's been an incredible conversation. Anything else you want to share or any advice that you have? And we'll go into Aspire Thursday after that.
Let me think. I think we talked about having a mentor, be curious, be a student of your trade. Nothing nothing that I can, nothing else that I can think of right now. No.
Well, fantastic. It really has been a good conversation. Well, let's jump into our Inspire. I'll go first, Natasha, and Mike, you can close us out.
Sure.
So my inspiration this week is my son-in-law, Jesse. So he's been married to my daughter for a few years now, and he's just an incredible man. And like a lot of, father-in-laws and son-in-laws, we didn't start off with, everything being rosy, but I've gotten to know him, and he is a kind-hearted man. He takes care of my daughter. Couldn't appreciate more what he does with the family, and consider him, one of my sons now. So I love you, Jesse. Appreciate you. And you inspire me. So I appreciate it.
That's a good one.
Good. Great one.
All right, get prepared for this one because it's halfway cheesy and halfway super deep.
Good.
I was prepping you now.
We're going to have a contest then.
Good. It'll make me feel better because mine's not a person; it's a concept, and it just has been heavy this week. So it's been a tough week for me, just honestly, work-wise, and I think that. I was reminded that your totally resonates with me, the white knuckle. I pressure myself so much, and I watch my team pressure themselves. And some people it's often the people who are really good that are so hard on themselves. And I think that's me as well. And so sometimes we put so much prep. So, there's times where you have something and you can't sleep, right? You're stressing about it. I'll work myself into headaches. It's wild. And then you do the thing, right? And then after, it's this feeling of accomplishment. And I think that every time I remind myself, I'm oh my gosh, why do I do all that? To come out of it and just, you're proud of yourself. And it was just a reminder that you can do hard things. And I think sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit for that. And so just reminded me that, it will be fine. Now there's something to be said about the prep for it, right? If you're not stressing, if you don't care, then it's one thing, but, it's just, so I guess it's the feeling of accomplishment after you do something hard or you do something that's stressful or something outside your comfort zone. And you're oh my gosh, I'm so proud of myself that I did that. So, for me, that was it in whatever way that's an inspiration, but that was mine this week. So
that's a great one, Natasha. And it makes me think of, when I used to, when I was in the middle of my career or whatever, and I'd wake up in the morning, I started thinking about a problem I had. And it's funny that all these thoughts and all these fears came into my head, and I'd be oh my God, the world is ending. So I went back to bed, I'd fall asleep, I'd wake up in the morning, and I'd think about it. I'm why was I so stressed in the middle? I can figure this out. Yeah. So I learned not to believe the middle of the night, Mike, right? And just when I start having these things, just shh, go to sleep. Yeah. So mine's a little deep, and I took a little bit of liberties here. So I appreciate you bearing with me, but I really wanted to pick someone that wasn't a family member, but I couldn't. So I'm going to end up with my mom, right? So I told you my mom had 5 children in 6 years. Each of us very, very different, right? So it would have been easier on my mom if my siblings and I were the same, but we were very similar, but we're not. So in the early 80s, and I don't want to get too deep, but I probably will, so I apologize. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, right? Chemotherapy back then was, imagine how bad it is today. Imagine how it was in the 80s. It's just, I think it's probably just poison, right? Yeah. Just killing all the bad stuff. Shortly after that, she lost her spouse, my father, in a not so eloquent manner, and that was almost 40 years ago. Her daughter, my sister Ann, eventually sort of went down a similar path as my father. But she's still alive, and she's homeless in Florida, right? So my brother Jack, and this is kind of, again, I apologize for going so deep. About 9 years ago, my brother Jack drowned in a rafting accident, right? So you're going to have to edit all this out. Sorry. So my mom has had this life that anyone would consider to be very tragic, right? But she took that and has ended up with a life that for her has been very fulfilling. Right. One example is when my father died, my mom definitely mourned. And then after she was done mourning, she's it's time to start living. And she has done that. Right. I have friends who have lost a parent. And what has happened to the surviving parent is that they really end up starting to lean on the children, right, for the rest of their life. My mom's number one goal in life was to never have to lean on her kids. And she has followed through with that. So she just turned 90. If you were to speak to her on the phone, She sounds like she's 60. So she's very sharp, right, internally, but her body is giving up on her, right? So the years ago, I thought to myself, everything that she's been through in her life and the way that she's handled it, she's been through so much that I decided that for the rest of her life, regardless of what she does, she gets a free pass, right? And that is how I have tried to treat her for probably the last 20 or so years. So my Thursday inspiration is my mom.
Oh, I love it. Not just a Thursday. That's a life inspiration for sure.
And please don't apologize for that being deep. I think that was probably one of my favorites that we've heard. So I appreciate you sharing.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate it. This has been great. We went over an hour. I just got lost in the conversation.
Yeah.
I had a really good time. But it's time.
Yeah.
It's time.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's wonderful to hear your story and for being so open. And as I always do, I have a good notepad of little gems over here that you drop. So I appreciate it.
You bet.
So I will go ahead and close this out.
Yeah, do it.
Gramps, Millennial, and Mike out.